Let's see how we will configure a tracking server. We will need to provision S3 storage for artifacts and Postgres server for metric storage. For S3 storage, we will create an IAM role with relevant S3 permissions and configure our AWS CLI. For the database, I will not install Postgres but will rather run a Docker image. After the database server is up, we will also need to create a database inside this DB server. Let's now see how we will carry out these steps. Let us now see how will we prepare the infrastructure for running the MLflow tracking server. Now I have prepared some documentation in the part 4 of the MLOps repository, whose link is in the description, and I'll broadly follow this to help you set up the tracking infrastructure. Now the first thing you might want to do is you will want to create some kind of S3 buckets on which you would want to store your model artifacts or training data sets that were used to train the model. Let's see how will that work. For that, you will need access to an AWS account. Here I've logged in from my administrator account, but what I suggest is that you go ahead and create an IAM role and go here, go to users, maybe create a new user. Let's call it maybe test and click next. And you may want to attach some policies to it. Since we are only accessing S3, so I will search for S3 full access and grant it the S3 policies. I will create user, and once I have this test user, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the security credentials and create access keys. So I want to create access keys for a command line interface. Click next. I forgot to check this one. Click next. No need to probably provide a tag here. If you want to, you can. I'll just say create these keys. Now, what I will then have to do is I'll have to configure these keys into the AWS CLI. How do you do that? Let's look at it. So you will open up your terminal, and I'm assuming that you have AWS CLI installed. In case you have not installed AWS CLI, then please install it. I will simply say AWS configure, and then it'll ask me some options. So I can copy the secret key, this access key, hit enter, and that will configure my user on the system to assume whatever permissions this particular user has given. In this case, it is S3. So hence, any action I do from command line will automatically be authenticated because I've given the AWS key and AWS secret ID as well. So I'm not going to do that because I already created a user. Let me go ahead and maybe delete this guy because I don't need it. So you must ensure that you have created the user. You can also use your administrative account, but I would suggest not to do that. Then you can go to S3 and probably, create a bucket over here. I already have created a bucket called ML artifacts over here. And I will give access to this bucket to MLflow tracking server. But for all of that to work seamlessly, you need to ensure that you have the correct credentials, you have the right user with the right permissions. In case you're using admin user, then on your AWS configure, you will have to sort of provide the access key ID and secret key for your administrative user. I am suggesting you don't use your admin user. So once you've set up your S3 bucket, the next thing you will have to do is you will need some kind of a SQL database. I'm using Postgres here, and usually database installations are a little messy. So I'm running the Postgres server in a Docker container. You can use this command to run your Docker container if you wish to run a database on a Docker container. What it will do is it will create a container in which Postgres version 14 is running, and the password for that I have configured is gun125. Once you have this Docker container running, you can go ahead and connect with your database. So I use PSQL. You can use any database frontend. So user is Postgres and host is localhost. Okay, provide the password. So now I'm inside the Postgres database. So I can list down the databases I have. You can see I've already created a database ML flow. When you will log in the first time, you will not have this database. So what you can do is you can say create database ML flow and hit enter. This will create a database for you. I'm not going to do that because I already have this database. Now these are the two things, major things that you'll have to do: set up the S3 storage, and then you will have to set up your database. Once that is done, you can run the ML flow tracking server. Now, how do you do that? If you go to the documentation and search for ML flow tracking on the ML Flow's website, you can see that ML flow tracking server can be run in different ways. It can be run on your local system. It can be run on somewhere on the cloud. So I am using this architecture over here, where my ML flow server, although it's running on the local machine, but it is storing the metrics on remote Postgres server. In this case, it is again running on local host, but I mean, this architecture works for that as well. And it is storing the artifacts on the S3 drive. And how do you run your ML flow server in this mode? You need to execute this command. Now, if you look at this command, what does it say? It says that you need to execute ML flow server, and you have to provide backend options. You'll have to start with the string PostgreSQL, whatever is the username of the Postgres database that you're trying to connect to, whatever is the password, whatever is the port, and the database inside the Postgres server in which you want to store your metrics. And lastly, your artifact store is your S3 bucket. So for that, you just need to provide the bucket name, whatever bucket name you would have created. Now, you will have to change this command based on what is the S3 bucket name that you have, what is the username, password, and the database that you created inside the PostgreSQL database. In my case, this is what this command looks like. The username is Postgres, the password is 1125 for the PostgreSQL database, and inside that I have a ML flow database that I've created. And this is the sort of S3 bucket that I want to use. So I'll just copy this and I'm going to paste it over here. And if I now run this, you can see that my ML flow tracking server has sort of started. So if I go to my local host, the port 5000, let's go there. You can see that I have this UI. This is my tracking server now running. Now, in this particular tracking server, using the Postgres as metric store and S3 as an artifact store, I can log my ML runs now. Now we will first see how to log your ML runs, and then we'll modify our project to include the logging as well. So I'll see you in the next video.